You can train for skills. You cannot train somebody to give a shit. And if you hire somebody who doesn't give a shit, you are stuck, right? You are going to be dragging a boulder up a hill the whole time you work with them. It will be misery. Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for self-employed people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're a creative or soul-centered entrepreneur or wellness practitioner who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hey, I wanted to tell you a quick note about a series that's starting today. I'm doing a series in the Sunlight Podcast on behind the scenes business lessons and some of the best advice and learnings that I've experienced as an entrepreneur. These next couple of episodes are going to focus on really key, exciting things that you can implement in your creative business, in your care-based business. These episodes are especially helpful for you during these summer months, getting your business operations to be as smooth and working as well for you as they possibly can. So I hope you enjoy this behind-the-scenes entrepreneurial series in the Sunlight Podcast. Hello. Today, I want to talk to you about hiring. A lot of you need to hire, should hire, and it's something to really think about. And I want to share with you some of my biggest learnings from hiring over the past several years. I have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I have learned some really hard lessons. So shout out to a Sunlight Podcast listener who actually asked me for a podcast episode about hiring. This one is a little bit in no particular order. If you hear this and you want a follow-up about something specific, will you let me know? Because I will happily dig in a little more to any of these areas if it feels valuable to you. So with that said, let's talk about it. All right. I think some of the terrible mistakes when you first hire, I will tell you the mistake I made when I first hired my very first employee. I had worked with contractors before at that point, usually just for a specific job, like a graphic designer to do some branding work for me or, things like that. But in terms of a role in my company, I wanted to hire properly as an employee. And at the time when I made that first full-time employee hire, I was so stressed and so busy. And this is a bit of a classic. I'm not alone. And I was so overwhelmed by my business that I just wanted to let go of some of the heavy responsibility of running this company. And frankly, I wanted to let go of some of the big decision making, which was exhausting and difficult and relentless. Now, I was in a coaching program at the time. I guess I'll shout it out. It was Rachel Rogers' We Should All Be a Millionaire program, which I highly recommend. It is an awesome program. And Rachel Rogers is just an incredibly smart woman, business owner, entrepreneur. I love her. But she was really, all about hiring employees and that commitment being some magic in your business, which is true. But she also has a much, much bigger company than me. So one of the first mistakes I made, and she talks about hiring like a right-hand person in your business, a sort of operations director. So I wanted an operations director. I wanted someone who would do decision-making, who would do strategy. I sort of wanted another me. And that was a huge mistake. To be honest, I wasn't capable of facing this at the time, but there was no way to outsource that. Those big decisions, they do rest with me. I don't have a big enough company where I can pay the kind of executive level salary to another person where they could actually have that level of depth in my business. Not to mention the type of training that it would take to get there, I wasn't capable of delivering. So I hired too high up the food chain. That was my big mistake. What I would certainly say to any of you listening who are feeling overwhelmed in your business, and I mean that no matter how small, is that there is an incredible amount of value you can get out of hiring someone to do the tasks, the sort of lower dollar level tasks that take up your time and that keep you away from your bigger revenue generating activities, thought leadership activities, things like your writing, your speaking, your podcasting, your program development, your webinar development, your art itself. So hiring for those lower dollar tasks is a really, really smart move for anyone. And I recommend hiring sort of at the bottom of the food chain as opposed to at the top, because first of all, it's going to be a less expensive mistake if you make a mistake. And it's also something where the person kind of is entering at the ground level and you can train them. And once they capture the ability to get a handle of this type of task in your business, they can move on to this other type of task. So you can keep feeding them more and more tasks and growing them and their expertise about how your business runs, how the parts integrate, and basically how to be a good worker for your business. All right. Something I highly recommend long before you ever hire someone, or even if you're thinking about it, I recommend just today, get out a pencil and paper and start this, is time tracking. Now, I'm not going to lie, time tracking is miserable. I fucking hate it, but it is so worth it. It's so worthwhile. What I recommend you do is, for one thing, it's good to know what you actually spend your time on in general. It's a good move for your company in general, but it's really interesting for several reasons. Now, there's a whole other reason to do time tracking, and I have a future podcast coming about this to show you where you focus the best and what tasks scatter your focus. I learned so much about working more effectively and powerfully once I did time tracking. So it has that benefit. But when you're hiring, something you want to do is really track what tasks you're doing and how long they're taking you, because you want to be starting to name the tasks of your business, like documenting what those tasks are. And then, so I want you to go through your day, any sort of 10-minute chunk of time, I want you to make sure you record. So maybe once per hour, you go to this timesheet and you write in there, what you spent the last hour doing, and be really relentless about it. Be honest. Okay. Did you sink 30 minutes into scrolling on Instagram? That's important to know. Might be a little painful to look at. It honestly changed my Instagram habits really quickly once I started tracking how much time I lost to that. But it starts to be really valuable, and you start to see things objectively that in your head might seem bigger than they really are or smaller than they really are. Once you see on paper where your time is actually going, it's going to teach you so much about where you need to hire. So I think you need to do this time tracking for a week to get a really good sense. 2 weeks is ideal. It's hard to do, I'm not going to lie, but it's awesome. So once you do your time tracking, the other thing I want you to do is go back through the tasks at the end of each day, and I want you to put a dollar amount on them. Is this a $10 task? Is this a $100 task? Is this a $1,000 task? In other words, I want you to assign a value to that work. Now, I'm not trying to say people who do this work are worth this. I'm not making that kind of a value judgment, but objectively speaking, there are tasks that can be done by someone you can hire for, $10, $20 an hour. And there's tasks that only you, the CEO, can do. And if you had to hire someone to do them, you would be paying $100, $200, $300 an hour, or for a contractor, for example, to write conversion copy for your evergreen webinar funnel, right? You're going to need to hire someone at a very high level for that. So if you are doing that work, that is more valuable time that is far harder to outsource than, for example, sorting your inbox, scheduling, posting things on Instagram, things like that. Okay. So I want you to sort of make about 3 tiers, lowest income value, mid-tier income value, highest income value, and whatever it is in your business, it's going to vary. Assign one of the 3 tiers to each of those tasks. Okay. just looking at that document after a week or two is going to teach you so much about the current state of your business. And it's going to show you who you need to hire and what tasks you're going to need to give them. Okay. So that is probably my very best tip right out of the gate. That's not original. Many people have come up with that before. Rachel Rogers in her program that I did definitely talked about that. So definite credit to, the genius, Rachel Rogers, for that. Okay. Another thing that I highly recommend, this one might be the most important thing when you actually do get to hiring someone. And I think this is a good idea, even if it's going to be a contractor in your work. So for a lot of you, your first and best hire is going to be a virtual assistant, basically somebody who can take those daily tasks off your plate. And one of the very most important things I think you can do, and people skip this because it's work and it feels harder, but trust me, from someone who's learned the hard way, trust me, don't skip this. I recommend that you write out a job description. Write out the full job description of what you are looking for. Put into it your company values, your mission, your vision. Put into it your non-negotiables. Put into it personality traits that your ideal candidate would have. I want you to get very specific and nitty-gritty in this job description. It's good to start with a template. You can go find one online of a job that's similar and maybe use it as a starting point, but you want to make sure it has a lot of the flavor of your own business, your own brand, your vision, and your values, because that's going to be very important to convey to the candidate. The reason that I want you to go through this actual work of creating the job description, and I also want you to list out what the tasks are going to be in that job description, is because the mistake I see people make is they just ask around. Hey, I need, somebody to post on social media for me. Do you know anybody? Right? They just ask around their network. Well, there's a couple reasons that that's not a good way to go. You are not going to be communicating the full extent of what that job is to the candidate, and you are not going to be fully vetting them as they come in. In other words, when you hire that way, you are on both sides missing critical information. And I'm telling you now, that missing information is the reason you end up firing them, or the reason they end up ghosting you, or the reason that position ends up not working out. Okay. So do the whole due diligence right up front. And I tell you from the trenches, it will save you heartache on the other side. All right. So once you have that job description, get a couple eyes on it, really work hard on it, make sure other people read it. If there's anyone else in your business or anyone who's worked for you who's willing to put eyes on it, ask them if it feels right. Ask them if there's anything, it's very easy as the owner of your own business to have blind spots. I say that from experience. I just sort of naturally assume that everybody is the way I am. And every time somebody is not how I am, which is basically every time, I'm like, oh, right. Oh, that's kind of unique about me. Right? Oh, God, I'm such a dope sometimes, but aren't we all? Anyway. Get somebody else's eyes on this job description. Once you feel really good about it, then ask your friends. Then say, here's my job description, and give that and say, can you post this? Can you look around? That's how to do it, because that way the person knows what you're looking for. You've listed out. And I find the exercise of actually listing out what you need, what tasks you need, forcing yourself to get past being vague and actually put specifics onto it just makes your hiring so much stronger. You will thank me. You will thank yourself. The other reason that asking friends is not where you should begin and end is for equity reasons, right? Most of us in this country tend to hang out with people like us. Now, I wish that were different, but statistics are very clear that that is true. So if you're a white person and most of your friends are white and you ask your friends about this job, guess who you're going to end up hiring? Another white person. Now, I mean, that's not terrible, right? But I mean, for equity reasons and for having a better representative group of people who work in your company, serving your clients better, it's just a million times better to do a more serious job about hiring equitably. So I encourage you to push outside of your immediate circle and post in places you might not have thought of before. Maybe you can post at HBUs. Maybe you can join programs like Rachel Rogers that are incredibly diverse on purpose and find like Black and Latina copywriters, et cetera, like people who might not have been in your circle, but you can find, right? I have gotten so much value out of that. And I just think it makes my life richer. And you know what? Honestly, if you want to go with the data shows very clearly that companies with a more diverse workforce are stronger because they consider more elements. So I really, really believe in being equitable when you hire. And so make sure you don't just ask your friends, because that's how you're going to get somebody who looks just like you hired in your company. All right. Another key, again, I'm kind of skipping around and not going in order here, but one of the things that, oh my God, has burned me. When you hire somebody to work in your business, I really encourage you to look for signs of commitment. All right. If you're not hearing an enthusiastic yes towards the time commitment, towards the work involved, towards the mission of the company, that's a red flag in and of itself. If somebody has even the slightest bit of hesitation as they answer questions about when they're available, if they like the work, et cetera, beware. I really would pull back. I would not hire that person. You can train for skills. You cannot train somebody to give a shit. And if you hire somebody who doesn't give a shit, you are stuck, right? You are going to be dragging a boulder up a hill the whole time you work with them. It will be misery. So I have found that the people I love working with and have the best relationships with in the workplace are people who are really, really into my mission, right? And who really care, who really want to show up, want to learn these skills, right? Super important. So on that note, I think that's why putting your vision and your values right into your job description is also really, really important, because it will help you attract people who like that. And isn't that really what you want? If that's your vision, don't you want everybody pointed in that direction? So when I'm hiring people, if they say, if they're clearly jazzed about equity and finance and civics and things like that, that's a good sign to me. But I also want to know that they want to learn the skills of the job that's being done behind the scenes. They're willing to roll up their sleeves. They're willing, when we're in a crunch period like tax season or during a launch, they're willing to put in some extra hours. Of course, I pay for those hours, right? We're not being exploitative, but I've hired people before who are very strictly like counting their minutes at the job so much that they were not willing to lift a finger a minute past 5 p.m. And I was like, could you, so I highly recommend you need to be sure the person gives a shit. All right. I also recommend very much listing out. So in that side of like, when you are writing out your job description, when you're writing out how you're going to hire somebody, like your interview process for somebody, I think it's really important to write out what your non-negotiables are, right? People who come interview with you are going to be coming from different places in life, different perspectives, experiences. That's all great. They're going to have different skills and they're going to have different personalities. This can be wonderful, right? But it's really important for you to get clear up front what your non-negotiables are. Okay. So if you, for example, run your launches on Sunday evenings and working, one weekend every 3 months is really critical to your success as a business, I would ask the candidate about that. And I would say, this is a part of the job. This is part of the hours of the job. It's not negotiable because this is my, strategically the time that I've decided that I need to run my launches, right? If that person can't work weekends, isn't willing to work weekends, no, that's a no, right? Likewise, for me, giving a shit, being behind the vision of the company is an absolute non-negotiable. I will not work with someone who doesn't believe in a fair tax system. That is so important and fundamental to the values of my business that I am not willing to entertain hiring somebody who feels that way. Yep. So write out your non-negotiables. I also want you to be careful not to go too crazy here. It's important that you prioritize them, because you might not find, a non-negotiable is just that. You're not going to negotiate it. You can't have 25 non-negotiables. It's better to have 5, right? Be super clear and have them be fewer. Okay. You don't want to get vague. A non-negotiable might be honesty. It might, or integrity. A non-negotiable might be an unwillingness to blame others, like a desire to take responsibility for your work in all circumstances, right? That might be a non-negotiable. All right. Similar and related to your list of non-negotiables is listing out for yourself, and this is more an exercise for you, the owner, is listing out what is trainable and what is not trainable. This is actually really important, right? Integrity, honesty, caring about the mission. These are things that are not trainable, right? You cannot train someone. You can create a company culture to incentivize that, to make it clear that it is part of your values as a company, but you can't train it, right? So it's important for you to list what is trainable and what is not. I will tell you from experience that having made the mistake, I have many times now hired the person who clearly cared a lot about the mission of the company and was willing to roll up their sleeves and get uncomfortable and learn a new thing, who was a little bit less skilled or had less deep of a resume than somebody who had more skills, but gave off some signals of a lack of commitment. Okay. You cannot do anything about somebody who doesn't want to be there. Right? You can't do anything. Your only option really is to let them go, to say, this isn't working out. And that's not where you want to be. I will tell you a crazy story about when I was hiring, early days in Sunlight Tax. I was hiring for this position, this operations director position, which I now know I shouldn't have been hiring for at all, but I was. And I hired this woman who was, oh my gosh, such a good cultural fit, creative, innovative. She had all the skills I wanted. She was awesome. And I loved her. I can't remember what question I asked. She worked at a bigger company and she had her own podcast, which was pretty cool. Because at the time I hadn't started my podcast and I was thinking about it and I was asking her some questions. And she told me this story where she said, yeah, sometimes in the middle of the day, I'll just log off my Slack and my email and I'll put in my headphones and I'll record a podcast for my own podcast, right? This podcast was her own. It was not through the company. She's like, I'll put my feet up on the desk and I record a podcast for my own. And I just call it PTO. That's paid time off if you don't know. And at that moment, she was like one of my number one candidates until that point. And when I heard that sentence, my jaw practically dropped to the floor. I was like, you what? I didn't say anything about it actually. But I was just thinking, on that company's time, you are just stopping your work and you're doing this thing that is your own side project and you're calling it paid time off. Oh my God. I was like, it is one thing to admit that in a moment of candor to your friend, but to say it in a job interview to your next employer, holy shit. Situational awareness. But I was very grateful she had told me that story because thank God I didn't hire her. So, that was an example of a red flag that I saw that was like, oh, this is a person who has a certain attitude about work that is not going to work for me. Right? Yikes. All right. So I have another thing. When you're interviewing people, sorry, I'm kind of hopping around. I think it's really important to ask a question. This is kind of a classic interview question, but to end an interview with any questions for me, or to ask the question, do you have any questions about, for me or about the company? And I take that question very seriously. If somebody doesn't have anything to say there or doesn't have a question, I'm not hiring them. The reason is that is a chance for that person to show that they have done some research, that they have taken some initiative, that they have looked into the company, that they've been resourceful, and that they've maybe put some thought into something, whether it is being curious about the way I operate some aspect of the business, wondering about some strategy question, some operations question, whatever it is. If a person can't take that initiative or engage their own sense of thoughtfulness on a problem, just think how they're going to be as a worker, right? That's not somebody do you want to hire somebody who doesn't take initiative, who doesn't put in some thought or do a little bit extra? So to me, that's a question that gives you an opportunity to see if this person is willing to kind of dig in and be resourceful. I also want to say that when you are looking at somebody to hire in your business, if you get a hint of something, you get a whiff of maybe being very happy to take advantage of their employer, for example, or not being honest, or having really negative things to say about their colleagues, maybe some blaminess, maybe a lack of taking responsibility for their own work. If you get even a little hint of that kind of thing coming through in an interview, I want to say from experience, trust your gut on that. Because believe me, you have to think about what an interview is. An interview is somebody on their very best behavior. So if under the optimal circumstances, their best behavior, they're still showing you that they're happy to blame others or not take responsibility for their work or not take initiative, you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, right? When somebody works for you, you're going to see them not just on good days, you're going to see them on bad days. And how is this person on a bad day? Believe me, if you get a hint of something in an interview where they're on good behavior, you're going to see a much worse version of it. You're going to see miles and miles more of that lurking below the surface once the rubber actually meets the road. Once you're actually working on a deadline towards something hard, or they get an assignment totally wrong and they're embarrassed and they're not ready to admit, that they need help, right? You got to be really careful about that. Okay. I will also say when you make your very first hire, so for those of you, I may do another episode on hiring employees. I have done both, hired employees and contractors. When you make your first hire, like I said, the most likely position for most of you that you'll hire for is a virtual assistant or some kind of assistant to take those admin tasks off your plate. So you have more time freed up to do the higher level sort of thinking level work that you probably need to do. I highly recommend starting with a few hours and working up. It's important to be very clear to the person you're hiring that you may have this intention, ask about their availability so that you know if this is an option. But I find a lot of times that if you are a busy, stressed out solopreneur and you hire somebody and it starts to work and it starts to free up more of your time, you start thinking of more tasks. You start thinking of more things that it would be helpful if somebody else would do. And so that position tends to grow. So I find it very hard to go from 0 to 40 hours a week. I think that's a hard learning curve as a leader, as a person hiring. But to hire somebody, maybe even at just 5 hours a week, right? To do your social media posting or send out your weekly newsletter or whatever the task is that is really important for you to get off your plate. If they're good at it, if you develop a good rapport and you like the way that they work, then it's really nice to be able to say, can we move this up to 10 hours a week, 20 hours, et cetera. So I find that to be a way that is very manageable when you're managing the risk of paying someone and you're not sure yet how it's going to impact your business and if you will recoup the money through you being available to do more of those like higher revenue generating tasks. And then the last thing I want to say is just, this is not a comprehensive episode about how to hire and all the sort of legal and technical things you need to take care of. But I do want to give you a couple of tips on that to get you started if this is you. So for one thing, when you do hire someone, whether it's a contractor or an employee, sign a legal agreement. Protect yourself, protect them. Legal agreements are really there so that both parties can read them over in the beginning and agree on things. That person has a right to look at the contract and say, oh, I'm not sure how I feel about this. Can we talk about that? The thing is, having an agreement, it opens that discussion up and makes it really clear from day one. So you both know what you're agreeing to. I'm not saying you can't redline parts of it and, each of you adjust it. That's fine. In fact, it's wonderful. The point of a legal agreement, in my opinion, is to get on the same page and have some protection around what your initial agreement was, because people tend to feel mushy about those things when you get later down the road and there's something really terrible has happened in the business. Okay. So contractor agreement is very important if you're hiring a contractor, and an employment agreement is even more important if you are hiring an employee. Now, if you are feeling like you're ready to take that step towards hiring, first of all, I'd love to know. Tell me what your next step is. Tell me if this episode has been helpful for you. Tell me if you want to hear more about it in a future episode. But I also have a couple of resources for you as you get started. So if you are planning to hire an employee, you're going to need to run payroll. And I just want to recommend for a minute the payroll software that I use. It's called Gusto. It is just fantastic. It really, in my opinion, Gusto makes things really it makes running payroll easier. And payroll is a thing that traditionally people used to have to pay an accountant to run for them every month. And it costs a fair amount of money to hire an accountant to do that. Gusto costs, I think the starting plan is like $39 a month. It might go up to $50 or $60 if you have a bunch more employees, which you clearly don't at the beginning. But for, somewhere around $40 a month, it's doing this thing that you used to have to hire an accountant to do. So I think it's absolutely fabulous. The software works really well. And it also kind of grows with your business. I say this with personal experience because I use it. And over time, I've added things to it. So I've added in workers' comp. I've added in employment law posters. I've added in a 401k plan. So there's all these other apps that kind of hook into Gusto. And so when as your company grows, you're like, you look it up in Gusto and you're like, oh, okay, cool. That's how I hire someone in another state. I'm going to go follow their instructions and do that. Or, I want to open a 401k plan. I'm going to go use their partner to open the 401k plan. All right. So I highly recommend Gusto. I have an affiliate link for it. Yeah, I do. I make a little money when you join through that, but you also save some money. And so just full disclosure, it's what I actually use in my business. And I think it's an incredible value. It's one of the perfect products in the world because it really improves on the way things used to be by saving you just a ton of money. So Gusto is great for running payroll. You can pay contractors through Gusto as well. When you use my affiliate code, you get a $100 gift certificate after you've run it for a month. Also, if you're planning to hire a VA, a virtual assistant, I will tell you where I hire my VA through. And I've had many VAs hired through many different ways, directly through agencies, all kinds of different ways. At the moment, I have a VA through Scale Up Support. It is a company owned by my business coach, and I really love it because she gives these VAs a lot of support and training. She gives them resources. They're paid very fairly, but you pay through this company so that the sort of employment side stuff is taken care of by that company. You do have to sign a contract that says, I'm not going to poach this employee, right? You can't go around the company and then hire them as an employee for your business. So you have to agree with the agreement. But that said, I have just had such a wonderful experience with my current VA. I'm so, so, so happy with him. And it's been a wonderful experience. And part of what I think is so great about that is that the VAs in Scale Up Support are given a lot of support themselves. They have a place to go for resources and questions. That's not just you. And so it's just a really nice and gentle way to hire. So I'm going to put a link to Scale Up Support in my show notes for you if you're interested in checking that out. And I also want to say I have something special for you. I made a list because a lot of you asked me about the things that I use in my own business. I made a list of my favorite tools that I use in my business, like Gusto, like Scale Up Support, things that have helped me keep my expenses down, helped me track things well, helped me run my business smoothly. So I made a list of these. And if you are interested in that list and links to these services that I love that have helped me build my company, you can go to sunlighttax.com/podcast. And if you fill in your name in the middle, in that yellow bar in the middle, I will send you that list of resources that I use in my business. Some of them have discount codes applied. So for example, Mile IQ, the mileage tracker I use, you get a 20% discount if you use that code. If you use my Gusto link, you'll get $100 off. So feel free to go to sunlighttax.com/podcast and grab that list of resources. I think it's super valuable. And yeah, they're just the things I love the most that I work with in my business. All right. So let me know if this episode has been helpful for you. Send me a DM on Instagram. Tell me what your biggest takeaway was. Are you looking to hire? Have you had some of these pain points? Are you interested in hearing more stories of, misery that I've been through or learnings? Let me know what you think, because I would love to do a follow-up episode. I think that hiring is really difficult, but it really unlocks a lot of the power and magic of your business. When you learn how to hire well, it can help you grow your business in a really sustainable way and serve more people and fulfill your vision better. So I hope that's really helpful to you. I will see you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.